Ferrari will long have had the run of races after Formula One's August break circled on its calendar. This was a golden opportunity to reignite its season after a tough spell with events at tracks where the Ferrari SF-24 is at its best. In particular, that means street circuits. When team principal Fred Vasseur was asked about the car's strengths on outlier tracks after a troubled Spanish Grand Prix weekend in June, he joked that it wouldn't be all bad for Ferrari if it added wins in Singapore and Baku to the Monaco Grand Prix victory Charles Leclerc had already bagged. Ferrari also won in Australia courtesy of Carlos Sainz early in the season on the Albert Park track. Unfortunately, the Azerbaijan and Singapore Grand Prix weekends didn't go quite as well as hoped and have eliminated any realistic hopes of Ferrari winning the Constructors' Championship. While it's still only 75 points behind McLaren, Ferrari needed to be a lot closer after this run of races. The second part of the season started well for Ferrari. Its qualifying pace was poor at the Dutch Grand Prix, but Charles Leclerc came through to third place at Zandvoort, with Sainz a solid fifth. Then came the Italian Grand Prix at Monza. That was always an opportunity for Ferrari because not only does it go well at street tracks, but also low downforce circuits. Monza is the lowest downforce track of them all in terms of car configuration, and Leclerc won thanks to executing a superb one-stop strategy that turned the tables on McLaren. Sainz backed that up with fourth place. Suddenly, Ferrari's Constructors' Championship hopes were rekindled as it closed to 39 points behind struggling Red Bull and just 31 off McLaren. In Azerbaijan, Leclerc lived up to the high expectations by taking pole position and leading the first stint, but McLaren driver Oscar Piastri overtook him after the pit stops and held the lead to the end. Leclerc finished second, but Sainz drew a blank after a late collision with Red Bull's Sergio Perez that cost Ferrari big points. Ferrari started the Singapore Grand Prix weekend strongly, or at least it did with Leclerc, given Sainz struggled with brake problems on Friday. But things took a downturn on Saturday with understeer in FP3, then a disastrous Q3 session that left its cars on the fifth row. First, Sainz crashed at the final corner after losing it on a bump as he started a flying lap. Then, with qualifying effectively boiling down to a one-lap shootout after the restart, Leclerc went out with his front tyres around 10 degrees cooler than necessary. He couldn't get them up to temperature as a result, setting a time good enough for 7th on the grid that was then deleted because of a track limits violation. There was talk of the tyre blankets being a problem, but Vasseur explained it was down to Ferrari faking its initial release of the car to try and gain advantageous track position. That, combined with having to wait in the pit exit, meant the temperatures dropped too low. Leclerc and Sainz recovered to finish 5th and 7th in the race, but that was another missed opportunity. That said, Leclerc suspected that even with a smooth weekend he'd have struggled to beat Norris and Max Verstappen. You might think Ferrari can take the proverbial positives from the fact that across Monza, Baku and Singapore it was always competitive, even if that run only yielded one victory. But as Sainz has warned, there's a very real danger that this strong run could be a fake one. And that's all because he recognises there's a chance that when Ferrari gets to the next race at the more conventional circuit of the Americas for the United States Grand Prix, its weaknesses will re-emerge. There has been a clear contrast between Ferrari's performance on outlier tracks, so street circuits and ones where it can run in low downforce trim, and more conventional tracks where it needs to produce high levels of downforce for a wide range of corner speeds. There's a very interesting pattern in Ferrari's single lap pace across the season. Our Super Times metric, which utilises each car's fastest single lap of a race weekend expressed as a percentage and ranking the tracks in order for Ferrari, shows a clear pattern. There are 3 tracks where Ferrari has been outright fastest. 2 of those are no surprise, Monaco and Baku. The other is Bahrain, which is something of an anomaly given that it was based on a Q2 lap by Leclerc that he couldn't repeat when it mattered in Q3. Bahrain is not as conventional a circuit as it perhaps looks, and there Ferrari's gentleness on its tyres and the punch its power unit packs off slower corners thanks to having a smaller and therefore more responsive turbo than its rivals meant it performed well. But also in the top half of Ferrari's tracks so far this season are Miami, Monza, Australia and Saudi Arabia. Clustered in the bottom half are more conventional tracks. That includes circuits like Austria, the track that features the most percentage of cornering time on the calendar, and Zandvoort. At the bottom is another anomaly, Canada. The circuit Gilles Villeneuve is a curious track, one that generally gets considered among the street tracks, but it was a weekend on which everything that could go wrong did go wrong for Ferrari. Both cars were eliminated in Q2 thanks to misjudging the starting tyre pressure, and Leclerc was down on power in the race. Vasseur went as far as saying he hoped all the bad parts of the season were thrown into one weekend, although he used stronger language than that. If the whole season comprised street tracks, it would be good news for Ferrari. To illustrate this, we've calculated the championship based only on results from tracks that are generally regarded as street circuits in nature and characteristics, so Saudi Arabia, Australia, Miami, Monaco, Canada, Azerbaijan and Singapore. Leclerc is right in the thick of the fight with Verstappen and Norris. So were this a real championship, it would be perfectly set for a winner-takes-all finale at Las Vegas in November. If Canada hadn't gone so disastrously and Singapore qualifying not gone wrong, Leclerc could already have it won. This demonstrates how lopsided Ferrari's performance is. It really is king of the outliers in 2024. So why does the Ferrari work so well on street tracks and not so well elsewhere? Well, for starters, the aforementioned smaller, more responsive turbo always guarantees good power delivery off slow corners. It's also an agile car that rides curbs well and that can be very effective in short, sharp, slow corners. At a track like Baku, for example, that's helped by the low wing levels that makes the rear end fractionally unstable and therefore helps the front end turn in well. It's also confidence-inspiring under braking, for Leclerc in particular. Much of this will be down to the mechanical platform of the car, and those characteristics have been present for several years. So why doesn't that translate to regular tracks? Well, using its most recent bad track, Zandvoort, as an example, Leclerc said he battled with understeer and struggled to rotate the car. Running on conventional tracks with longer corners and in high downforce trim is where the problems arise for Ferrari. Medium speed corners have been a specific problem, while there are also times when slow corner understeer has been an issue because the overall aerodynamic load needed for the track can't be balanced with sufficient load at the front. As Ferrari senior engineer Jock Clear admits, Ferrari has been backed into a corner at higher downforce tracks thanks to that lack of front end. That's a generic trait of these ground effect F1 cars, one that Ferrari hasn't mitigated as well as others, partly because it's not as advanced with flexible wing technology as McLaren and Mercedes are. The Ferrari has also, in contrast to the previous 2 years, tended to look after its tyres well in the race, but struggled to warm them up thanks to being almost too gentle on the Pirellis. That's the case regardless of track configuration and makes the SF-24 a stronger race car than qualifier. There's also the porpoising problems that became apparent when the major floor upgrade was introduced at the Spanish Grand Prix in June. Both drivers complained of bouncing, and Ferrari initially made a small modification to mitigate the problem for the Hungarian Grand Prix before the break. There was then a floor upgrade for Monza that appeared to work well. That was followed by a front wing upgrade in Singapore that also delivered the expected performance and was designed to give it a little more front end to tackle the weakness that hurts it at conventional circuits. This all sounds very positive, but as science has warned, the fundamental problems may not be solved. This means the key test will be the next race in Austin. Ferrari will introduce an upgrade for the run-in. Vasseur has characterised that as a small upgrade, but also likely the last one for the season. There are hints that the upgrade might be a little more significant than Vasseur says, but what will matter is whether it works as expected and if the porpoising problems have been consigned to history. As Leclerc says, while he's confident the team has made gains, it will be in Austin that the extent of that will be proved. The Austin performance will also be an indicator of whether Ferrari has solved the underlying problems with its tools that contributed to it going the wrong way in the first place. As Clear said in Singapore, poor correlation between wind tunnel and the real world is at the heart of its troubles. Ferrari has made some tweaks to its wind tunnel to produce more precise data, given how sensitive these cars are in yaw. It's understood this has led to improvements with the rolling road system used. And this all matters, not just because Ferrari wants to rekindle the dying embers of its Constructors' Championship push and win more races, but because of the implications for next year. If it has understood the root cause of its car problems, including those of porpoising and the limitations that make it a car better suited to outlier tracks than more conventional circuits, then that is good news for its hopes for 2025 and beyond. If not, then that could mean Ferrari continues to have a similar performance pattern for a good while yet. And while that means there will be more victories, the danger is that a championship win is likely to remain out of reach.